It was early morning when the sunlight slipped through the lace curtains, brushing across the worn photographs that lined the mantel. Every corner of that house still whispered her husband's laughter, the faint echo of his hammer as he built the porch, board by board. 40 years ago. Mary touched the arm of his favorite chair, smoothing the faded fabric as if it were his shoulder. This house wasn't just walls and a roof. It was her history, her heartbeat. The one piece of her life that never left her side after he did. When her son Daniel called and said, "Mom, Tasha and I are moving in. You shouldn't be alone anymore," her heart had warmed. She thought maybe this house would feel alive again, with the sound of footsteps, laughter, the aroma of family dinners. But from the day Tasha arrived, something changed. Tasha's heels clicked sharply against the wooden floors, her perfume too strong for the gentle air of that quiet home. She smiled sweetly, hugged Mary tightly, and said, "We'll take care of everything now, Mom." At first, Mary believed her. She tried not to mind when Tasha replaced the floral curtains with sleek gray drapes, or when her old china plates disappeared, replaced by shiny modern dishes. "Just updating things a little," Tasha had said. But every little change took a piece of Mary's comfort with it. Soon, Mary began to feel like a guest in her own home. Tasha started giving small orders, subtle, polite, but heavy. "Mary, you shouldn't do the laundry anymore. You might strain yourself. Don't worry about cooking. Daniel likes my food better." And then, without asking, Tasha moved her office desk into the living room, the same spot where Mary used to keep her sewing machine. One afternoon, Mary found Tasha pulling down her late husband's portrait. She froze. "Why are you taking that down?" Tasha smiled too calmly. "Oh, it doesn't go with the new decor. We'll put it in storage." Mary's throat tightened. "That portrait has been here since—" "I know," Tasha interrupted. "But this house needs new energy. Don't you think it's time to move forward?" The words hit harder than they should have. Mary forced a nod, but inside her heart trembled. Moving forward to her daughter-in-law meant erasing the past. That night, Mary sat alone in the dim light of the living room. Her husband's empty chair faced her like a silent witness. She whispered, "They think they're taking care of me, John, but I think they're taking over." Outside, wind rustled through the garden he had planted. Wild roses, stubborn and strong, still blooming against the odds. Mary promised herself she would endure, quietly, gracefully. For now. But deep in her chest, a small unease began to grow, like the first distant rumble of a coming storm. And though she didn't know it yet, that storm would soon tear through everything she thought she could trust. The morning light crept through the window, pale and cold, just like the silence that had settled in Mary's home. It had been 3 months since Daniel and Tasha moved in. The laughter that once filled the house was gone, replaced by the faint clicking of Tasha's nails on her laptop and the hum of her phone calls that always ended with the same words. "Yes. Once the papers are in my name." Mary didn't understand what papers she meant. Not yet. Tasha's charm never faded in front of Daniel. Around him, she was sweet and gentle, draping her arm around his shoulder, whispering words that painted her as the perfect wife. But the moment Daniel left for work, that sweetness turned sharp. She began taking control of small things. First the bills, then the mail. "It's too much for you." "Mary," she'd say, her tone dripping with false concern, "you should rest. I'll handle the bank, the taxes, all of it." Mary hesitated but gave in, wanting peace more than power. After all, what harm could it do? But soon, she noticed changes. Letters addressed to her stopped coming, receipts disappeared, and whenever she asked about them, Tasha's eyes flashed cold for a moment before she smiled again. "Don't worry, I've filed everything." The word filed sounded more like hidden. Slowly, Tasha began isolating her. She stopped inviting Mary to the dinner table when friends came over. When neighbors asked after her, Tasha would say cheerfully, "Oh, she's resting. Poor thing's too weak to come out." Mary overheard that once from the hallway. Her hands trembled so much she nearly dropped the teacup she was holding. That night, Daniel sat at the edge of her bed, tired, distant. "Mom," he said softly, "Tasha's just trying to help. You should be grateful. She worries about you." Grateful. The word stung. Mary looked at her son's face, the same boy she'd once carried on her hip through thunderstorms. The boy who used to bring her wildflowers from the garden. He wouldn't meet her eyes. Tasha had built a wall of honeyed words between them, and he was too blind to see it. One evening, Mary was on her way to the kitchen when she heard voices from behind the half-closed study door. Tasha's whisper was low but sharp. "Once the documents are ours, she can go live in a retirement home." "Daniel, you said yourself, this place is too much for her. Imagine how easy things would be if the deed was in our name." Mary froze. Her heart thudded painfully. Daniel's silence stretched long. Then his voice, weak, uncertain. "She's my mother, Tasha. Let's not talk about this right now." Tasha sighed dramatically. "I'm not trying to take anything from her. I'm trying to secure our future. You know she'll leave it to you eventually. Why wait?" Mary stepped back, clutching the wall to steady herself. Her son didn't stop her. He didn't protect her. He didn't even know she had heard. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the moonlight silvering her tears. The betrayal was quiet but deep. It didn't come from strangers, but from the family she had loved most. In her heart, something began to shift. The silence she'd once chosen now felt like surrender. And Mary was not ready to surrender her home. Not yet. The next morning, when Tasha smiled and said, "Good morning, Mother," Mary smiled back just as sweetly. But behind her calm eyes, a storm was gathering, one that would soon turn that house of stolen warmth into a battleground of truth. The house had grown quieter, but not peaceful. It was the kind of silence that hummed beneath the surface, thick with suspicion and unspoken tension. Mary could feel it in the air, like the moment before a thunderstorm breaks. Tasha had started spending more time in Mary's study lately. She'd open drawers, move papers around, and call it tidying. Mary would watch her from the doorway, a small smile on her face, masking the ache inside. One afternoon, Mary walked into her room to find Tasha bent over her desk. "Rifling through a folder, Tasha," Mary said softly, though her voice carried enough weight to freeze the air. Tasha spun around, her eyes wide, her lips parting in a practiced tremble. "Oh, Mom, I was just looking for the medicine cabinet key. Daniel told me it might be here." Mary's gaze drifted to the open folder on the table, the one containing her late husband's estate papers. "You'll find no medicine there." Tasha's cheeks flushed, but she quickly forced a smile. "Oh, silly me. I must have mixed it up. Mary's eyes didn't move. "You'll just what?" For a moment, Tasha's mask slipped. Something sharp flashed in her eyes before she turned away. "I'll just look somewhere else." As she left, the faint scent of her perfume lingered, sweet but heavy, like the cover of poison. When the door closed, Mary exhaled, her calm cracking into trembling hands. She gathered the papers carefully, sliding them back into the safe behind her wardrobe. Her fingers paused on one folder, the deed to the house. The weight of it was more than paper. It was memory, love, and every promise her husband had ever made. She ran her thumb over his signature and whispered, "I won't let them take what we built. John, not this." That night, long after everyone had gone to bed, Mary sat alone in the dim glow of her bedside lamp. She thought of the day her husband had given her that deed, wrapped in brown paper, smiling as he said, "As long as this stays with you, this home will stay ours." A tear slid down her cheek, not of weakness but of resolve. She opened her small notebook, the one Tasha never noticed, and wrote down a reminder. "Call Mr. Rayner. Finalize trust papers." Yes, Mary had already begun to prepare for this storm. Months ago, when Tasha's smiles first started feeling like knives, she'd quietly met her lawyer. The house was no longer in her name. It now belonged to Ella, her granddaughter, the only soul untouched by deceit. Mary smiled faintly at the thought of the little girl's laughter echoing in the halls again someday. The next morning, Tasha returned to her search, more careful now, moving like a thief dressed in politeness. She checked the drawers, lifted books, even peeked beneath the carpet in Mary's room when she thought no one was looking. But Mary was always watching. One afternoon, as Tasha crept into her room again, Mary's voice rose from behind her. "What are you hoping to find, dear?" Tasha spun around, startled. "Oh, I was just dusting." "Funny," Mary said, stepping closer, her calm almost chilling. "There's no duster in your hand," Tasha stammered, her lips twitching into a nervous laugh. "You're misunderstanding." Mary smiled faintly. "Be careful, Tasha. Curiosity is a dangerous thing in this house." Tasha left, flustered, but her eyes burned with silent fury. That night, Mary double-checked the safe, pressed her palm against its cold metal door, and whispered, "You'll try again, won't you? But I'll be ready." Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, as if answering her. Mary turned off the lamp and sat in darkness, her heartbeat steady, her resolve stronger than fear, because she knew Tasha wasn't done searching, but neither was she. The tension in the house had reached its peak. Days had become brittle with silence, and every conversation felt like walking on shattered glass. Tasha's footsteps echoed down the hall like a countdown, measured, deliberate, restless. She'd searched every corner, every drawer, every inch of that house for weeks. But the deed remained a ghost she couldn't catch. One afternoon, Mary sat in the living room, knitting beside the window. The late sun poured through the glass, painting her face in gold. It should have been peaceful, but peace had long left this house. The sound of Tasha's voice broke the quiet. Sharp, frantic. "Daniel! Where are the documents?" Her tone was shrill, desperate, like a mask tearing off. Daniel came running down the hall, half alarmed. "What documents, Tasha?" "The house documents," she snapped. "The deed, the proof. Everything that says this house is ours." Mary's hands froze mid-stitch. The yarn slipped from her fingers and fell to the floor like a soft echo of something breaking inside her. Daniel frowned, confused. "Ours? Tasha, what are you talking about?" "This is my mother's house." Tasha turned to him, eyes blazing. "Your mother's?" "Daniel, I'm your wife." "This house belongs to us. We live here, we take care of it, we pay the bills." "She's old, she doesn't need it anymore." Mary rose slowly from her chair. Her voice was calm, but it sliced through the air like ice. "Is that what you believe, Tasha? That age erases ownership?" Tasha spun around, startled. Her tone shifted, sugary and false. "Oh, Mary, don't take it that way. I'm just saying it would be practical." "Practical?" Mary stepped closer, her eyes steady. "To steal from a widow who welcomed you into her home?" Daniel's face went pale. "Tasha, what's going on?" Tasha's patience snapped. Her voice turned venomous, echoing through the walls that had once held love. "This house is mine now. Hand over the documents!" For a moment, time stood still. Even the ticking clock seemed to stop. Mary stared at her daughter-in-law, feeling both disbelief and pity. "Yours?" she repeated softly. "You think screaming makes it yours?" Daniel grabbed Tasha's arm, trying to calm her, but she shook him off violently. "You think she'll let us have anything? She's old, controlling, selfish. You'll see. Once she's gone, we can finally live like normal people." The words struck Daniel like a blow. His jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Mary's chest ached, not just from Tasha's cruelty, but from her son's silence. The boy she'd raised to be kind now stood frozen, torn between love and loyalty, unable to protect the woman who had once protected him from the world. Mary turned away, her eyes glistening. She walked slowly toward the framed portrait of her husband, the one Tasha had wanted to remove. Her fingers brushed the glass, tracing his smile. When she finally spoke, her voice was low but strong. "Your father built this house with his hands, brick by brick. Every corner carries his sweat, his love, and his promise to keep our family together. And now you stand here, trying to tear that apart." Tasha rolled her eyes, bitterly muttering, "Enough with your sentimental speeches." Times change. Mary looked at her, truly looked. For the first time, she saw not a daughter-in-law, not family, but a stranger hungry for what she didn't earn. Her heart broke quietly, but her spirit did not. "You may have taken my son's trust," Mary said softly, "but you will not take his father's legacy." Tasha's voice rose again, nearly a scream. "We'll see about that." She stormed out of the room, slamming the door so hard the walls trembled. Daniel stood motionless, guilt etched across his face. "Mom," he began, but Mary raised a hand gently. "Go after your wife," she said. "She needs you more than I do right now." When he left, the house fell into silence once more. Mary stood alone in the fading light, her reflection flickering in the window pane. The woman staring back at her wasn't fragile anymore. The pain had hardened into purpose. She whispered to the night, "It's time." The quiet widow was gone. In her place stood a woman ready to fight, not with anger, but with truth, because love had built this home, and justice would protect it. The next morning, the house felt heavy, like it was holding its breath. The echoes of last night's shouting still clung to the walls. Mary moved slowly through the rooms, touching the furniture, the photographs, the life she'd built, all still standing. Though her trust was in ruins, Daniel and Tasha didn't come down for breakfast. The clatter of dishes and the smell of coffee no longer belonged to a family. They were the background noise of a battlefield. Mary sat at the table, her hands wrapped around a cup of tea gone cold. Her mind, however, was clear. The time for silence had ended. Later that afternoon, she slipped on her coat and left the house quietly. She didn't tell Daniel or Tasha where she was going. The autumn wind was brisk as she walked down the familiar street toward the small law office near the old library, a place she hadn't visited in months. When she stepped inside, the receptionist looked up. "Mrs. Walker," she greeted warmly. "Mr. Rayner's expecting you." Mary nodded. "I figured he might be." Inside the office, Mr. Rayner, her late husband's lawyer and an old friend, rose from his desk. "Mary, you look tired." "I am," she said softly, taking a seat. "But not beaten," he smiled knowingly. "You were right to prepare early. The documents are safe, untouched. Your granddaughter's name is on the title, just as you requested." Mary exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Good, then they can scream all they want." "It won't change the truth." Mr. Rayner leaned forward. "Do you want to make your move now?" "Not yet," she said, her eyes calm and cold. "Let them think they've won a little longer. Tasha's greed will expose her faster than I ever could." That night, Mary returned home with a quiet smile that unsettled Tasha more than any argument could. Tasha watched her from across the dinner table, suspicion flickering in her eyes. Mary noticed. She spoke lightly as if nothing had happened. "Daniel, I went through some of the old bills today. You and Tasha are doing a fine job keeping things in order." Tasha smiled thinly. "We try, Mother." Mary's gaze lingered on her just a second too long. "Yes, I can see that." Inside, she could almost hear her husband's voice. "Patience. Mary. The truth doesn't need shouting. It needs time." Days later, Mary came home early from the market to find Tasha in the study again. This time, she wasn't pretending to clean. Papers were spread across the desk, photocopies, fake signatures, and a forged deed that looked dangerously close to real. Mary didn't step in immediately. She stood at the door, watching. There was something strangely satisfying about seeing Tasha's hands tremble as she faked the very thing she could never own. When she finally entered, her voice was almost gentle. "Forgery is an art, isn't it?" Tasha spun around, color draining from her face. "Mary, what are you—" Mary tilted her head slightly. "You should have told me you needed my signature." "I would have made you tea first," Tasha stammered, trying to gather the papers, but Mary stepped forward and calmly picked up one sheet. She looked at it for a long moment, then placed it back down. "You've worked hard on this," she said softly. "I almost pity you." And with that, she walked out of the room, leaving Tasha frozen. That night, Mary sat on her bed, the shadows long and soft around her. She wasn't angry anymore. She was ready, because her revenge wasn't loud, it was written in ink, sealed in trust, and hidden where greed could never reach. And soon, the world would know who truly owned that house. Outside, the wind rose, carrying the faint scent of rain. The storm she had waited for was finally here, and this time, she wouldn't seek shelter, she would stand right in the center of it. The morning arrived with a strange stillness. Rain clouds hung low over the Walker home, casting the walls in silver-gray light. Mary stood at the window, her hands resting on the sill, watching the garden sway under the wind. The air carried the weight of something inevitable, justice on its way. Downstairs, voices echoed. Daniel was pacing, Tasha's tone sharp and anxious. Papers lay scattered on the dining table, the forged deed, now slightly crumpled. The ink smudged where her shaking fingers had tried to make it official. Mary descended the stairs slowly, each step deliberate. Her calm unnerved them both. Tasha turned sharply. "Why are you looking at me like that?" Mary didn't answer. Instead, she walked to the table, picked up the fake deed, and laid it flat before them. "You forgot to spell my middle name correctly," she said quietly. Daniel froze. What is this?" Mary looked at her son with eyes that once held endless affection, now filled with quiet disappointment. "Ask your wife, dear. She's been busy preparing to own this house." Tasha's voice rose, desperate. "She's lying, Daniel. I was just organizing her old papers, that's all." But her words faltered when the doorbell rang. Daniel frowned. "Who's that this early?" Before anyone could answer, the door opened and Mr. Rayner stepped in, rain dripping from his coat. Behind him were two officers, serious and silent. Tasha's face drained of color. What's happening?" Mary didn't look at her. She turned to the lawyer. "You have the originals?" Mr. Rayner nodded and placed a sealed envelope on the table. As per Mr. Walker's last amended will, this house and its assets belong solely to Mary Walker, and upon her passing, to her granddaughter Lily. No other claims are valid. Daniel blinked, stunned. "Amended? But Father never—" Mary's gaze softened, though her voice was steady. "Your father made those changes the year before he died, after seeing how easily greed could poison love." Tasha's lips trembled. You set me up." Mary turned to her, her tone gentle but cutting. "No, dear. You set yourself up the moment you tried to take what wasn't yours." The officers stepped forward, holding the forged documents. One of them said, "Mrs. Tasha Walker, you are under investigation for attempted fraud and forgery." Daniel's voice cracked. "No, please, Beer, there must be a mistake." Mary interrupted softly. "The only mistake was letting her believe silence meant weakness." Tasha's defiance crumbled. Her voice broke as she turned to Daniel. "You said we needed this house, that your mother was wasting it. I did this for us." Daniel looked at her, torn between guilt and disbelief. "You ruined us for greed," he whispered. As the officers led Tasha away, her cries echoed through the hallway, the same hall where she once strutted, mocking Mary's frailty. Now, her voice was hollow, pleading for mercy that never came. The door closed behind them. Silence settled like dust. Daniel sank into a chair, his face pale. "Mother, I didn't know it would go this far." Mary looked at him, tears glimmering but unshed. "You did know, Daniel. You just didn't want to see it." She turned toward the window again, watching as the police car disappeared down the road. The rain had stopped. Sunlight began to break through, spilling gold across the wet grass. Mr. Rayner smiled faintly. "You've handled this with grace, Mary. Most would have sought revenge with fire." Mary's lips curved into a tired smile. "Fire burns fast. But truth lasts forever." And as she stood there, the light warming her face, the old house seemed to breathe again, free, alive, and finally hers. But deep inside, one final ache remained, the loss of a son to his own silence. Justice had arrived. But peace would take longer. Still, for the first time in years, Mary felt something close to freedom. The reckoning was done. The house was quiet again. Too quiet. Days had passed since the officers took Tasha away, yet her voice still haunted the walls. Every room held the faint echo of her footsteps, the bitter scent of her perfume. But now, instead of rage, there was only emptiness, the kind that comes after a long, brutal storm. Mary sat in the parlor, a shawl wrapped around her shoulders, staring at the family photo on the mantel. Her late husband smiled beside a younger Daniel, the pride in his eyes as bright as the morning sun. She traced her finger over their faces, her breath trembling. "Henry," she whispered to the picture, "I kept your promise. I protected the home you built, but I lost our boy along the way." The floor creaked behind her. Daniel stood there, hesitating, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights. He had tried to speak to her many times, but the words never came. Now he simply lowered himself to the rug in front of her, just as he used to when he was a child, asking for comfort. "Mom." His voice cracked. "I don't deserve to call you that anymore." Mary looked down at him. This man who had once held her hand to cross the street, now broken by his own choices. "You're still my son," she said softly. "But you lost yourself trying to please someone who never saw your worth." Daniel's head bowed. "I thought I was helping her build a future. I didn't see what she was doing to you." "I didn't want to," Mary's eyes glistened. "That's the price of silence, Daniel. It doesn't keep the peace. It only gives cruelty more room to grow." Tears slipped down his cheeks. "Can you ever forgive me?" She reached out, her hand trembling, and placed it gently on his face. "I already have. The moment you saw the truth, you found your way back to me." For a long time, they stayed there, mother and son, wrapped in the fragile warmth of forgiveness. Then, a light knock came from the hallway. Little Lily peeked in, clutching a coloring book to her chest. "Grandma? Can I sit with you?" Mary smiled through her tears. "Of course, my darling. Come here." Lily ran to her, curling into her lap. The scent of her hair, sweet and innocent, filled the air like a balm. Daniel watched quietly, the scene both healing and heartbreaking. "She's been asking about you every day," he murmured. Mary chuckled softly. "Children know when hearts are heavy. They feel it before we ever speak it." Lily looked up at her. "Mommy's not coming home, is she?" Mary hesitated, then stroked her hair. "No, sweetheart. But she's going to learn something very important, that being kind is more precious than having things." Lily nodded, her small hand wrapping around Mary's fingers. Outside, the sun began to set, painting the room in gold and rose. Dust danced in the light like tiny fireflies. For the first time in months, the house felt peaceful, not empty, but alive again. Daniel stood and looked around the living room. The curtains, the old wooden furniture, the faint ticking of the grandfather clock. "I forgot how beautiful this place is," he said quietly. Mary smiled faintly. "Beauty never left, Daniel. We just stopped looking for it." He turned to her, voice filled with quiet determination. "I'll make things right. I'll take care of you, of Lily. No more lies, no more hiding." Mary reached for his hand. "Then that's all I ever wanted." As the last light faded beyond the window, Mary whispered to herself, "Maybe forgiveness isn't about forgetting what was done, but remembering who we still are." Lily yawned softly, her head resting against Mary's shoulder. The child's laughter, once lost to tension, now filled the room like a gentle song. And for the first time, Mary felt truly at peace, knowing the house had finally returned to what it was meant to be. Not a place of greed or control, but of love, forgiveness, and the fragile, unbreakable bond of family. The days that followed were gentle, not perfect, but peaceful. The kind of peace that feels like a deep breath after years of holding it in. Mary walked through the house early each morning, sunlight spilling across the floors her husband once polished by hand. The echoes of old pain still lingered, but they no longer ruled her. The walls, once heavy with anger and secrets, now hummed softly with life again, laughter, footsteps. the scent of fresh bread baking in the oven. Lily's laughter had become the rhythm of the house. She'd chase her toy down the hallway, her curls bouncing, her giggles spilling through every open door. Sometimes, she'd stop at the framed photograph of Henry and whisper, "Good morning, Grandpa," as if he could still hear her. Mary would watch from the doorway, her heart swelling with a bittersweet kind of joy. Daniel had changed too. Gone was the restless man blinded by ambition and guilt. He now woke early to tend the garden, his father's old tools in hand, planting marigolds where weeds once grew. It was his quiet way of rebuilding, not just the home, but himself. One afternoon, as Mary sat sewing near the window, Daniel came in carrying a small wooden box. "I found this in the attic," he said softly. Inside were old letters, yellowed, fragile, tied with a fading blue ribbon. Mary's breath caught. She hadn't seen them in years, letters Henry had written to her when they first built this house. Promises of love, of protection, of growing old together under this roof. She smiled faintly. He always said a home is only as strong as the hearts that live in it. Daniel knelt beside her, his eyes glassy. "Then we're rebuilding it right this time," she reached over, cupping his cheek. "Yes, my son. Brick by brick, heart by heart." The late afternoon sun poured through the lace curtains, painting them both in gold. Lily burst into the room, holding a bunch of daisies she'd picked from the garden. "Grandma, look!" "For you." Mary took them with a tender smile. "They're beautiful, sweetheart. Just like this home." Lily climbed into her lap, resting her head against Mary's shoulder. Daniel watched them, a faint smile crossing his face, the kind that carries both regret and peace. Outside, the wind rustled through the trees, brushing against the windows like a gentle whisper, as if Henry himself was saying, "Well done, my love." Mary looked around the room, the same walls that had once held betrayal, now glowing with forgiveness. "This house finally belongs to love again," she murmured, her voice soft but steady. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was guarding memories. She was living them again, in every laugh, every hug, every quiet moment shared under the roof she refused to surrender. As the evening light faded and the house settled into its familiar hum, Mary closed her eyes, smiling to herself. The battle was over. The home was hers, not because of the deed or the walls, but because love had found its way back through the cracks. In the end, Mary's victory wasn't in reclaiming a house, it was in restoring its soul. Because sometimes, justice isn't loud or cruel, sometimes. It's simply peace returning home.